All right, so Tonya, I have seen you on my Facebook. I've watched a lot of your beautiful reels, and I can just see that you're like a woman from the heart. Like you lead by the heart. You are just authentic and real, and just the way that you are. And so when I asked you to come on, it's just about us just having like almost a fireside chat in one way, just sitting and chatting about our processes and where we come from and where we're headed and what we can look forward to, even with this new earth and everything that's coming together. So maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and then I'll ask you a question.
Hi, I'm Tonya, Tonya West, for you that don't know me. I spend a lot of time making just reels, as Ellen said, reels, and really just an advocate for mental health,
Mm,
self-love, self-awareness, just getting to know yourself. And, there was a time where I was involved heavily in ministry and did things kind of just as a production of getting things out. Now I pretty much, it's like night and day. I just kind of recessed back inside myself and began to produce the things that spoke to me. And lo and behold, they spoke to others as well.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's what I felt when I watched one of yours. I was just like, oh, this is just really speaking. And it speaks to the soul. It speaks to like that deep recesses of our heart that we've covered over, that we've had covered over with conditioning. We've had covered over with, systems, all of these things, which honestly brings me to like my first question for you, and we'll just take it from here. But you've been parts of deconstruction communities, religious deconstruction. I've been going through it, and we're now all in this process, a lot of us in different places, but restructuring and all of that. And I was wondering if you could just share a little bit of your background, like your religious background, and then how that shifted and turned into deconstruction. Like what caused you to want to even, depart or leave or shift your beliefs?
right. So as long as I can remember back, even as a child, I was very spiritual. I wasn't so much into a religion because I didn't have the thinking capacity to follow the routine or the rigorous, the what the part of religion with the memory and scriptures and
Mhm.
things. But I can remember even as far back as 4 or 5 years old, I would see ain't what I thought was angels. I
Yeah.
would see other beings. And so I was seeing things that other people weren't seeing. And it made me feel a little overwhelmed to come forth and talk about that because even the closest person to religion at the time was my grandmother, and she was Baptist. She was Free Will Baptist. And so, along that area, I couldn't have talked about that. Now, as I got older, I rocked on. I had a very troubled childhood. I grew up as a ward of the court in the state system. So the state system pretty much was my mom and dad. I went to court every 6 months and was assigned a foster home or where I was going to live. They checked up to make sure I was okay, things like that. But I had a very troubled childhood. So I kind of contribute that to what I saw and what was always around me because I knew that I was surrounded. I knew that I was protected. I would do things that things should have happened, but I was always protected in those situations. Now,
Mhm.
sure, there
Mm.
were times where things happened, with molestation or rape, things like that. But and I felt at the time that I wasn't protected. But the strangest thing was I always knew that I was whole. I always knew that I was okay. And I was
Mm.
always able to traverse over those things. And even adults would, in my counseling sessions or going back to court, they would say things like, you're an old soul. How do you see the good in that? How can you pick that apart at such a young age? But
Mm.
I contribute that to spirituality even then, and actually the right model of spirituality.
Okay.
The because I look at, and you could argue that and say, well, then why did that happen to you if you were being reared in that? But I could then turn around and say, a very dear friend of mine that was a pastor died of cancer. Why did he die of cancer when he was
Yes.
surrounded by the right way?
Mhm.
And so, there's the argument on both sides. But as I got older, I came into more of a charismatic background.
Yes.
I started attending a charismatic church, and that more fit me, because they encountered my vision, that was okay with them
Mhm.
to a point. That was okay until I got too weird.
Okay.
Too
All
many
right. Yes,
things,
I'm
too many
following.
things were not adding up to what that doctrine or that dogma was. And so it left me feeling, well, am I wrong? Am I
Mm,
seeing
mm.
something weird that other people don't? But I just kept on tracking along. And at, let's see, what year was it? 2015. 2014, I applied to Bethel School of Ministry there in California in Redding.
Yep.
And I was accepted to school. I was set to go off, and I was going to live there and go through the whole experience. But I was in law enforcement at the time. I was a detective and worked the streets both. I fell in my house and broke my back. I broke the foramina off of my L spine. And so I was unable to go to Bethel, but then I was unable to attend my work like I should.
Yes.
I couldn't
Yes.
pass the physicals. When you do the shooting every year, you have to drop prone on your stomach and stand up and shoot from a kneeling position, from a standing position. And with all of these things happening in my body, I was unable to do the physical part of it. Little did I know, I broke my back as a secondary issue to multiple sclerosis, but I didn't know then that that's what it was. We couldn't determine that until just 2 years ago, looking back at the past and the history of the injuries. I
Mm.
actually fell and broke my back because my leg was dropping. So, in drop leg, that's multiple sclerosis, and I was having optic neuritis, but we didn't put all those things together to come up with that diagnosis back then.
Yes.
So I went through not being able to go back to work. I went through not being able to go to church. I at church too was a Sunday school teacher. I was on staff there.
Mm, mm.
I was a worship leader. I was very active, very very active in that church for probably 2 decades. But I could no longer go when my body wouldn't cooperate with me and I was going through these things. So, your second question, as of what started this
Yes.
process, was being at home alone by myself, with myself, having to get to know myself. And then, of course, with my job in law enforcement, I worked child sex crime cases, and so I would do the forensic interviews on the children, and then I would take it to court
Mhm.
from the cradle to the grave with the suspect and the child. So I say all that to say that while I'm in my downtime getting to know myself, all of these things began coming forward because they never really go anywhere. Energy never dies, it only changes forms.
That's correct.
It
Yes.
was still in there and it
Yes.
began to spill out, which made my dark night of the soul actually start. Having been in those situations myself as a child, and then plugging into that career field, some would say, well, you were cut out for that because you had experienced it. So you knew, you had compassion at every level.
Mm.
And that's true. I see that. But also, it immersed me in it for a decade where I did no self-care, no upkeep, no nothing. And it was stuck in every cell of my body.
Yes.
And so deconstruction, when it started with me. I deconstructed self. I deconstructed all of the paradigms I had built within me. I hadn't even touched Christianity or the church or anything at that point. I was deconstructing of who I was and the layers that I had covered myself with for years and years. Later came the religion and things like that, but I first began the work on myself. And I remember standing at my window. I lived in a big, beautiful lake house that overlooked the lake and had windows from the roof to the floor. And I mean, it was
Mm.
beautiful, but I stood looking at it and I said out loud, I do talk to myself. I'll be the first to say it.
Okay, I do too. It's okay.
Yeah, I said out loud, I am in a beautiful prison. And I really felt that I was in a beautiful thing that people would love to live in, but it was a prison to me at the time because I was stuck in where I had to deal with me. Now, at the time that this was going on, it was taking me deeper into the visions and deeper into what I
Mhm.
didn't understand at the time. There was one day in specific that I began what I call praying in the living room. And for an hour and a half, there were times that I wasn't even speaking in a prayer language. There were times that I was making sounds and I was producing a frequency, but it wasn't words.
Yes.
It was not words. And an hour and a half went by, and I had children at the time that I had to pick up from school, and I knew that I had to do that at 3:30. So an hour and a half, this was probably about 11, had went by, and I came back to myself. I call it waking up or coming back to myself because I had no, I mean, as far as the physical house around me, I had no idea where I had went or what I had done in the house. Now
Mm.
I did have outside understanding that I was in other places and I saw those other places. But if you would ask me where I would end up in the house, I wouldn't even know that I would have made it from my living room around to my media room with my eyes not even open, but in another space, in another dimension. And it felt like for the first time in my life, and I was always that weird one, the curious one, the one that wanted to go further, that wanted to know why things worked. But for
Yes.
the first time in my life, that kind of scared me. It kind of not in fear, but it made me want to understand what had happened and how it happened.
Yeah.
Where had I gone? What had
Right.
I seen?
Right. Yep.
Felt like it felt like a vacuum. It sucked me out of the physical here and now into an eternal space that had no time and no space time and no, there was nothing, no barriers to fit in there. And I remember calling my daughter, and I stayed on the phone with her and I said, I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm being vacuumed out of physical time. And I mean, I stayed on the phone with her probably 30 minutes. I knew I had to go pick the kids up and I knew I had to get a shower before I picked the kids up. And the funniest thing about it, why does things always happen in bathroom, but
Yeah.
in the shower, I remember holding on to the towel rack on the sliding door thinking, man, I cannot control this. I'm being taken in and out of what I call now dimensional planes. And I had no, like, I couldn't pull myself to stay in the physical. And I said, I've got to go pick these kids up. And at the time, I was like, God, I've got to go pick these kids
Yes.
up.
Yes.
Whatever we're doing, we got to stop. I have to fulfill my duties in the physical life. So, and I did, I even called my pastor that day and I said, I'm not crazy. I'm not that kind of person. I have to testify and do things that require me to be fundamentally right in my thinking
Right.
process, but I told him what was happening, and he referred back to a verse in the Bible, and you probably know this verse real well too, about being in the third heaven but not knowing that. Yeah.
Yes.
and
Yep.
and so you know i I believe that at the time and the parameters that I was at and the belief systems that I was at, that fit perfectly. That fit perfectly. And it still does today. I haven't thrown the Bible out. I believe it's a book of
Yes.
mystery. I followed it so closely for 30 years of my life. And I do believe it's a book full of mysteries, but I don't believe anymore in literal sense of like I used to. There's parts of it that I would take literal, but the whole Old Testament, Paul said, is to be looked at as allegory.
Mhm.
Many people miss that.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think differently now. I do not call myself a Christian. And when people hear that, immediately they go, they get afraid.
Right.
They're,
Right.
you don't believe in Christianity, then you're gonna go to hell. That's the one thing you can't let go of. And I feel for that side of the argument, but I don't believe that Jesus was a Christian. The word
Right.
Christian was created after Jesus was long gone, and so I identify with being as Jesus was. And I what I believe Jesus was a very mystical person,
Mm.
very mystical. And
Right.
I know everybody has differing beliefs, but that's kind of a short story of where I came from and where I'm at now.
Yes, yes. And I want to say first, I just appreciate um, just you sharing candidly your journey and appreciate just the work that you've done, the work that you did with children, the work, that you've done within your own self and all of that, because there is something to be said about an aloneness, because that is exactly how my deconstruction started. Was I was thrust into this place of utter aloneness. And in that moment, I experienced different mystical things that you're talking about, different stuff. And I was just like, boy, I don't have language for this. I don't have words for this, but what is this? But it felt right. It felt like I'm going somewhere where I've never gone before. I'm going to a totally different dimension. Something's happening to me, but I had a peace about it. I knew that it was right. I just didn't have the language for it. I didn't exactly know how to tell someone, okay, well, I was coming out of my body, and then I would, like, it was just, I had the same sort of thing. It was just like you feel like you're being sucked out, and it just, and what's fascinating to me, and I love talking to you, Tonya, because I resonate with so many things that you're saying, that as a child, for me, coming from just some areas of turbulence in my life as well, knowing that there were angels, seeing things as a child was helpful. It was helpful to me. It was a stabilizing force. It made me realize that there were bigger things out there than what I was actually experiencing at that moment. And I think, when we look at, religious deconstruction, and you talk about your time in the church, and I'm just kind of curious with you, if you ever felt within the church that it was limiting to you with your spiritual experiences, or did it really just, it catered to it and you were fine? Because for me, I felt like it limited. I felt once I began the deconstruction and moving out of that particular way of meeting with the universe, more things opened up. So I'm curious, like, did you find it constraining to you? What was that for you?
I found it very very much what I loved, and it made a lot of sense to me. Everything made sense to me to a certain point.
That's it.
There was a
Yes.
point in my life where I guess the what was within me began to grow, and it
Yes.
forced out the what was on the outside of me. It would no longer allow me to see from the outside, and there would be nothing to hold to, because it's kind of like what you said, seeing the angels in your life let you know that something bigger was out there besides you. What I began to feel within me and experience within me let me know that there was something bigger within me than on the outside of me. And I could not deny that. There was a time that it did. I embodied every bit of it. I was very zealous. I was very passionate. I believed it. I loved it. I mean, at 40 years old, I wanted to go through Bethel School of Ministry, married, dogs. I mean, I loved it. And, that leads me to the next thing, that I just sometimes I get frustrated that I spent so many years where
Mm,
I could have been doing this, but then I see this as I don't get frustrated and stay frustrated because I see it as springboards along the way.
yes,
I springboarded from the spirituality as a child, where it was open spirituality, into a Baptist tradition. And then I springboarded from that when I outgrew that, I springboarded into a charismatic
yes,
that held a little more. And then from the charismatic, the only other springboard I had to return to a child, the open spiritual
yes,
springboard.
yes.
It sent me right back to a child. And I believe that's what the scripture says. Unless you return to being like a child, you can't see the kingdom, because the kingdom is this mysterious big expanse that no
Mhm.
one can put in a box. It
Mhm.
inhabits everything, but nothing can inhabit it. Nothing can not inhabit, contain. It contains everything, but nothing can contain it.
Yes,
It's vast and it's big. So the only place to go was to return back to where, when you're a child, nothing is too big for you. You could be the president of the United States and nobody could tell you any different, because you have not yet been conditioned and barriers been put on you to dumb you down and make you believe that
yes,
none of that is possible. And
yes,
that angers me a little bit, because when we speak of spirituality, the things that we know and we see, I don't get angry at the people that I served with and that I did life with, because I know the very passion that I had and the love, and I thought that it was everything I was supposed to do, and I did it from my heart. And so, but to know that there isn't some entity that knows better, that we could place that righteous indignation on. When I see pine cones on the Vatican, and when I see the staffs that are held up, even with Moses and in the stories, and I truly understand now what those things are about, I have a righteous indignation that rises up in me, but because it rises up against the false propaganda that was used against mankind to make them somehow believe that they were not what they were,
yes,
full humanity integrated with divinity,
yes.
everything they needed. And that's where my thoughts go. If I had to say I was angry, that's what would cause
Mm,
the indignation in me,
mm,
because there is a group or someone. When we say they, it points to who's at fault. And I don't want to say they, but there has to be a governing group, whether it was integrated into the earth plane, by the divine, as
yes,
a because he does like discovering himself in us through things. This brings me to a quote. Rumi said that the wound is the place that the light enters.
mm,
And that is the way that it lights up the whole body, which brings me to another point. If the eye be single, the whole body is full of light. Well,
yes,
when we're children, the eye is single. We're
yes,
full of that
yes,
light. And that's why
yes.
you can't tell a kid that they can't be anything.
Mm,
So yeah, I that would be kind of my way out, and the way that I looked at the process as I saw myself leaving. I grieved. I
sure,
grieved of
sure,
all the relationships, the people, and
yes,
I still have very good relationships with some of the people, but you know, a majority of people, and this just comes from fear. This doesn't make me
exactly.
angry, but a majority of people, when you are not like them anymore, they cut ties. They cut the ropes on the balloon and just let it fly away. They don't want to be tethered to you. And I even remember doing some of this when I was in Christianity.
I know.
I would create conversations like how bizarre is this, but I would have these self talks to know how better to come up against someone who would try and defy my belief systems.
I did the exact same thing.
Yeah, and so
Oh my God.
after doing that a couple of times and then thinking about it in hindsight, because I'm big on hindsight because we never see the
Oh no.
gold if we look back. But now looking back at this age, I think, well, why did I have to create conversation to defend something
Mhm.
and to push everyone out that wasn't a part of us? That,
Mm.
even the scripture, if read the wrong way, says, well, they were never a part of us, so they departed. So, that's kind of what I did back then. And looking at that was absurd to me.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting. I went through layers in my area of just deconstruction. I had lots of anger for a long time, lots of just raging, really, just because I felt like I had been cheated in a variety of ways, that I could not be myself in a variety of ways. And so it's interesting that you're talking about going back as a little child, because what's fascinating was that was the scripture, the very scripture that I absolutely couldn't stand, because because of my childhood and because of where I had come from. So the idea of going back to being a child was just like, my whole self, even though I know in context what that means now, seeing through a childlike vision, seeing, without the parameters, without, with not even, it's just a trust. You're just trusting, but for me, it was one that really, really just brought me into these spaces and places of just like, I hate this scripture. I don't ever, but as I started to move out, as I started to move from this certainty model into the land of uncertainty, I was realizing, wow, I really kind of like that. And I would start to have these remembrance of when I was a child, the good, things that were positive, where the climbing of the tree, and I was uncertain what the next limb was going to be, and I was uncertain how high I was going to go, and then would I fall out of the tree? But I was comfortable with that uncertainty. I was comfortable with the fact that I didn't have all the answers for the tree. And then I would remember all these other things, like where I would go walking through the fields and through the woods, and I created all these. I mean, I had an imagination that was like massive. And I was remembering how safe I felt in my imagination, and how safe I had been, in the process, the creative process on the inside as a child. And as that started to happen to me, the tears flooded. I mean, because it was just like, my gosh, I had become so, what's the word I'm looking for? Very analytical. And I had become very much so certain in my faith with things that I lacked love, and I lacked, even just an ability to get along with people. And so as these things were starting to surface in me, I said that because I remember the scripture coming back to me. And then there was the next scripture that said, as the deer panteth for the soul, or as the deer panteth for the water, my soul longeth. And when it hit longeth, I lost it again, and I just wept. And I had like a real childlike healing that was starting to happen to me. And it was in this field I was in. And it was just this, it was just wave after wave after wave of all these places and spaces as a child that I had relinquished and had to give up in some ways, because I grew up way before my time in some things. And, there were areas of my childhood that were lost. And as I wept, it was like, this came off me. It was like the tears would come down this way, but it was replaced with giggles and laughter and these little things. And I just started laughing like a little child. And I remember I was laying in a fetal position. I can't believe I'm saying this live, but I was laying in a fetal position in a field, giggling and laughing and feeling the earth and seeing the ants. And I was being returned back to wonder and awe that had gotten smashed with certainty, and had gotten smashed with the way that, the regimented ways I was, very much legalism with Christianity, took away the awe and wonder. And after that, I never looked back again, because it was like, oh my gosh, awe and wonder, the beauty of being childlike and trusting, and everything was so vivid. And I remember the field grass was so vivid, and the ants, it was like they were talking to me, and everything came back to that place of being a child. And so it's funny hearing you talk, because I hated that verse, relinquished parts of myself, and then found myself returning right back there to that place of just a gentle unfold. It's just an unfolding. Everything every day now is just an unfolding, and the colors are vivid, and the sounds are vivid, and petting my dog is vivid, and spending time with my partner is vivid, and all these things that conditioning and certainty and all the legalism I had been under had taken away from me the ability to have awe and wonder. And I wonder if you would like maybe shed a little light on awe and wonder, because I just really sense that you have that ability just to see through the eyes of awe and wonder.
Yeah, so I do understand that. And I think it's interesting what you said, that verse made you look at the physical part
I
of your
know, again,
childhood.
I know.
Yeah, because if you think about it, that would make you feel that way. I haven't heard that before, but that is good. That is good. I'm sure many people probably look at things like that the same. But if it's like when you were describing laying in the field and just feeling the awe and wonder. Children are like that. They don't stay upset for long at all. They can be very upset by something, but they escape it into their imagination. And you said something very powerful there. When a child is being abused in any way, and I hate to say raped, but when they disassociate, and what they do is they go into the seat of their imagination and they escape that physical body. We never lose the ability to do that. We were
Yes.
always supposed to do that, because when they do that, when children do that, they're going into their divinity wholly, completely,
Mm.
because in that place they're whole. And what's happening in the physical on that realm or in that area is not whole, but they are not their bodies. So if you think about that, a child innately knows to absent itself from what's happening and travel into another dimension, another place, to where they can discontinue what's going on with them. And that's really what we do, with awe and wonder. Even being alone in the house, I could have thought that. And
Yes.
I was very heavily medicated on things for like depression and stuff. I thought the depression was from all the memories flooding from the cases I'd worked. But, a part of multiple sclerosis is depression. So it could have been the play of that back and forth. But I know even with those layered on top of me, still I was able to undermine that and go into my eternal being and take part in those things that were going on, because at the
Mhm.
center of us, we are that I that is experiencing that stuff, but yet we are whole. We are whole in and of ourselves. And if we can ever get back to that place, and that's the way a child, some people look at that and say, that's so sad. They had to disassociate with, but that it's a sad thing that happens, but it's a very amazing thing that happens, that you can
Yeah.
release that physical
Yes.
body and move into your eternity and begin to experience life in another dimension, even while something is happening there.
Mm.
So I think awe and wonder is something that as a child, how to get to. It's
Mhm.
a no-brainer.
Mhm.
Man, you just like reaching for the branches on that tree. You knew some of them were uncertain, but hey, it don't matter.
Yep.
It don't matter, because you trust your
Trust.
intuition, and you trust that voice inside you to
Correct.
take that next step and take that next step. As a child, we have that trust in us. before it gets conditioned out of us and
Mhm.
we stop completely trusting ourselves. So the awe and wonder somewhat disappears as we go through the conditioning of even the best systems.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
it could be I was doing good things for God. I was going out and feeding the hungry and
Mhm.
visiting the people on the streets of New Orleans and doing things like that. The mothers that lost their kids that were on heroin, and I was doing things like that, but I was doing it from my heart. I was doing it from my heart space. So there, I know that I was very passionate about what I was doing, but still the awe and wonder gets dumbed down in
Yes.
the structure of the system. And again, I don't blame any person on my level, because there is definitely someone higher up that's pulling strings, that has constructed even the school years, even all of the stuff we go through that
Yes.
conditions us.
Yes. Yes. So with all of this layers of conditioning and all of these things, where does a person begin? I know that's probably different for everyone, and maybe you can share a little bit of the peeling of the layers to bring you into that childlikeness, because that's a powerful place. That's a place of birthing. That's a place of creativity. I mean, that's the place where everything happens. And so maybe you can just shed a little light on either your process or even just your process and what other people can do to begin that unraveling back to the childlikeness, that child space.
Yeah, so I think, for me it was going through being alone and the things that I was, but it could be, the sad thing is that it doesn't have to be that way. It can
Right?
be, and I believe that there's a knock on the window or the door throughout our lives where we could side with that rather than siding with the conditioning, but we
Yes.
don't know that we are conditioned, which reminds me of the scripture that talks about the veil being torn from the top down. Well, there was a time in church, and my dog's barking,
It's,
she's
it's okay. It's
but
all
it's okay. There was a time where I thought, well, it was torn from the top down so that everyone would know that God tore it. Well, God, his ego doesn't need everyone to know that he tore it. So, what I've integrated in that revelation is that the pineal gland has to be completely opened, and it is as you're a child. But
Yes,
as you
yes,
become an adult, when that veil is rent from the top down and the eye is single, the whole body is full of light. So those lower energy centers, the I hate to use the beast properties, but
it's okay.
we can we can go to, there is a darkness and a light in every one of us. And so as that eye is single and the veil is torn from the top down, I see you having more control over those lower centers, because you're being led from the eye that fills the body full of light. And
Yeah.
so I see that as, that was a big step in my awakening or my enlightenment process. Many people call it different stuff, but awareness, I like to call it awareness because it never
Mm.
goes away. It's just under layers. Our body never goes away, but when we take our clothes off at night to take a shower, that same body is still there, but it's been covered in layers. So I
Yes.
don't believe that it ever goes away, but I believe that we are ignorant to the fact that we too have those same godlike properties. We too have been given, Christ is me, I am Christ, but I think that in a lot of people's life, maybe they'll go through a dark night of the soul, or maybe something great will happen, and they will even see through the greatness that there's more out there. I don't think it always has to be something bad, but
I
sadly,
agree.
the majority of people, it does have to be something bad, because we have built that tower up throughout our lifetimes, and so we have to then unbuild everything that we built. And normally something that comes in from left field and knocks you off your center, it topples all of that, and you start wanting to ask questions. And I think that's why at that point that
Mm.
you do that. And it doesn't have to be something bad. I know, a lot of people say the dark night of the soul brought me to an enlightenment, but I really feel like the enlightenment process, or that process, whatever people want to call it, is brought about when you truly want to know yourself. You
Yes.
truly want to go within and shut the door and know. And
Yeah.
like you said, you have that trust because you know his voice, and a stranger you won't follow. So if people, I remember in the church, I would hear, his voice, and a stranger you won't follow. And I would be like afraid to get out into circles that
Oh
might
my
teach,
gosh. Yes.
because I was afraid that it would be a demonic voice that was leading me
Right.
there.
Right.
But and
Yeah.
again, the righteous indignation at whoever created this matrix, I
Yes.
mean, crud, it had you at every turn. I mean, every which way you went, there was some barrier that would come up that would stop you from it. So, but I look at, my turnaround was around 2014.
Hmm.
The children that are coming up today, I have grandchildren that are just now becoming teenagers, and the school of thought in a child
Oh, wow.
now, as far as all of these changes happening on the
Oh my
planet,
gosh.
they will not go for, well, I guess that's just a mystery and we need to chalk it up to
Oh no,
mystery
they won't. No.
heaven. They're like, no, I want answers. They're a
Yes.
very cause and effect generation. And some people would say, well, a cause and effect generation can't see miracles, but they can see miracles because they more fully understand synchronicity, the
Yes.
universe, the
Mhm.
higher self, the
Yes.
and what church would like to call the celestial body and the terrestrial body, because in church I admitted that we were seated with at the right hand of God,
So did
yet
I.
we were on earth. So then I had to believe later on in life that we do
Yes.
have a celestial body and a terrestrial body. They
Mhm.
may not like those words because I didn't like those words, but I liked those words more than a higher self, lower self, or consciousness words, because I didn't like any of those words back then. They
Mhm.
didn't fit in my parameters, and
Mhm.
that was new age, and I did not want any part of that. So,
Yes.
I've came full circle with that. I've really walked out into some of that stuff that I was so scared of.
Right.
And I'm like, this is really it. This
Mhm.
that this is freedom. I
Mm.
no longer have to fit a regimen. I no longer have to cross my I's and dot my T's and make sure that I do everything right, or I'm
Yes.
to disappoint God. It it really is okay. And there is a wide space out here. And especially now,
Yes.
you can tap into knowledgeable facts, or well, knowledge. I really, between knowledge and wisdom, knowledge is learned and wisdom is from within. It's intuitive in nature. And so, I think that in spirituality, you're going into wisdom and leaving knowledge behind.
Mm.
And it's a beautiful transition because it opens up every possibility when you are willing to leave a set of standards that was man-made anyway.
Right.
Everything was man-made, and you leave that set of standards for the mystery, for the full, for the whole. You're going to see it. And I can't help but think, as you was describing your childhood, and mine, seeing things and noticing things that others didn't. I i know that you hear this discussion on chosen and called, and there could be that argument, that you're not chosen above ever. But I really feel like there were certain ones of us that even as a child knew the trajectory that we would make.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
mean, we could go
gosh,
down
you're
a whole
so
rabbit hole
right.
there.
Yes.
But I do believe we
Yes.
may not, it may not fit the scripture of, or many are called, but few are chosen. But I really do believe that we are marked the moment we get incarnated on this earth, in this planet, as forerunners or torchbearers. And it's not comfortable. It's not at all comfortable to
Oh,
break out of that. It's very hurtful and it's very alienated and alone. But that it turns out that uncomfortable feeling was beauty when we look in hindsight. We
yes.
love those times.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. And it's interesting you said that we knew the trajectory, because I remember as a child, I mean, I would have these discussions, but they were kind of like they were downplayed in the house, and I wasn't really allowed, to. But I always felt like I was going to do something really big. And I know that sounds like this is weird saying this right here live right now on Facebook with this, but I always felt like something's gonna happen that's really big through my life. And I don't, and at the time it was all, I mean, it was really childlike. And then it got all conditioned. And then, the ego got in and everything gets in. And then, that bigness became, I'm better than you or better than the next. And, I'm not there now at all. But I do believe that each of us are given this divine spark inside of us that is very that we have our own prophetic sound. If we want to use that term, we have our own resonance, our own frequency that no one else has. So just like our fingerprints are our own, and you would know this better than me, the fact that my fingerprints are my fingerprints, your fingerprints are yours. There's something about us having our own resonance, our own frequency, our own energetic signature that nobody can take from us. Nobody can quench that at all. Conditioning can cover it over. Our belief systems can squelch it. And, but I've always known somewhere deep inside that there's this sound that I bring to the planet. There's a sound that you bring to the planet, that the neighbor brings to the planet. And that if we were not here at this present moment in time, there would be a vacuum, there'd be a void, there'd be something missing. And that doesn't mean you have to go out and do some big, huge global impact. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that your sound alone, the very fact that we are sitting here right now, I'm in England, where are you? You're where you are and where I am, there's a sound that is going out. And even if we never spoke, even if we never did anything related to technology, that sound is still reverberating because it's made with divinity. It's the divine part of us. It's the part of us that is not constrained, can't be corralled, is like water that goes around corners and that's who we are. That's who we are on the inside of us. And so for me, there's been a real change from out here. I know something big is going to happen that is resounding out, but it's starting within here. It's knowing that I am just that right now, whether just sitting here, I'm that. I'm the sound, I'm the frequency, I'm the energetic signature. And then when you start putting legs to it, you start doing things like that gets fun, right? That's the whole creative process. But to encourage people who, maybe can't get out of their homes or can't do anything, their energetic signature, you're on this planet right now, that energetic signature, if it wasn't here, would be a loss to the planet. It's needed. Everyone is needed. All of us together are needed to bring this new earth that we're moving into. And I love what you said about young people and children. Yeah, they really have it today. They have a real sense of self, a real sense of realization. They have a sense of autonomy. And I agree wholeheartedly.
And I think they love themselves to an extent where we were always conditioned and taught not to love ourselves,
Ugh.
not to put ourselves first, to put everyone else before ourselves, to even so much as to do unto others as we would have done to us. But everything was pushed forward on others. We forget that scripture says us. We have to
Yes.
be whole as well. But the generation these days, I feel like the reason why they are so different in what they will accept and what they won't accept is because they do have the thing down with self-love. They have not been conditioned out of loving themselves. Now, we know that that can go more to a narcissistic
Sure.
place
Sure.
easy,
Yeah.
but there's such a need for that in people, and many of us that find ourselves going through this later in life, we have to
Mhm.
retrain ourselves and reteach ourselves that loving us first is a must, that we can't possibly love outside ourselves if we don't love ourselves. If we haven't healed ourselves, we can't go out and expect to heal anybody else. If we haven't accepted ourselves, we can't expect to go and accept someone else. I made a post yesterday that said, it's easy to love someone who loves you and who shares your belief systems, who shares your lifestyle, who shares everything like you do. But the real litmus test to love is, can you love outside of your little barriers that you've built throughout your life or your conditioning?
Mm.
Love is an energy, it's not an emotion. So
Mm.
it by rights, by means, it should be able to flow through any of those divides. Those divides shouldn't even be there. You take a child, and a child doesn't see ethnicity, race, culture. They can play with someone that is night and day difference to them. You could put a 5-year-old child in a room, a
Yes.
5-year-old Christian upbringing with a 5-year-old atheist, and they will see the beauty in that child. They will see the qualities in that child that their parents would come in the room and say, "Oh no, Junior, don't play with that one. Don't talk to
Mhm.
that one because they're this or they're that." Again, that conditioning begins to come up. And but you don't have that. Children don't have that. They don't divide and segregate into groups. And that's the biggest anti-Christ message, is to group people off and name them in groups. He accepts all. Christ, we're all made in the image of God. We're all made in his likeness, all of us. It doesn't matter what one life looks like as opposed to the other.
Mm.
And you know it but when we have those barriers built in, we can't see past them. We cannot see the tree that's standing there in all its beauty for the forest. We can't, or we can't see the forest for the trees. We just can't. You know, we stick so closely to our belief systems,
Yes.
and
Yes.
anything that would come against a belief system, it's almost life threatening. I remember when I was a young Baptist girl, and I was having a conversation with someone that was in the Church of Christ. And I was so scared to let my child go to the Church of Christ because I needed them to believe like Baptists believe, because that was the only way.
Right.
And
Right.
so that was my thing. I didn't want to let them get out there and hear,
Mm.
or I would even break CDs that were not Christian CDs, because I didn't want them first in my house, because they would bring demons in my house. That was my mindset. And I didn't want them to be played by my children, because that would get into their body and then they would be under the influence of that demonic whatever. So I I believe that once we break out of all those paradigms, we break out of all of those belief systems, we see that there is a lot more validity to things that we give credit to, because of our blinders that we have created throughout our lives.
Yes. Yes. I believe what you said about, self-love is not selfishness. It's not being selfish. It's, in fact, I mean, this is maybe a weird way to put it, but when I first started to come into self-love, and I'm growing in all sorts of ways, I still have ways to go in the areas of self-love. But when I started to come into it, I was realizing, wow, being created with divinity within me, when I'm saying I hate me, or I am less than, or I am a worm, that famous hymn,
Yes.
and I'm a nobody. God is here. I am here. We must lay prostrate continually. I had the understanding that was, I just lost it, was hurting, if I guess you could say. I mean, maybe this is not the right word, but hurting the one who created me. It hurt them to see, not hurt like like the way we do it here, but it was an insult in some ways, to the creator of who I was, when I am saying I am a nobody and I'm created worthless, and that's the better place, and I'm going to put my feet and lay on the ground and lay prostrate. And when I began to see that, it was like, oh my gosh, right. When a parent looks at their child, they see beauty, and they see something that's amazing and awesome, and they want to create that, and they want to cultivate that child to see that. If it's a parent that is that way, they're not going to look at the creation and be like, you're a nobody. And I just think it's the self-love message. Oh, talk about that a little bit. What helped you navigate into self-love? Because that's a big part of you. You talk a lot about that. What was your navigation with that?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't love myself either. I can remember
Hmm.
almost having a hateful relationship with myself.
Yes.
I would even be brushing my teeth or something and look in the mirror and go, God, can't you get this right? If something was going bad that day, or if I had ran into a situation that left me feeling overwhelmed or whatever, I would talk bad to myself. And when I was stuck within, not the house that I told you about to begin with, but as the process went on, I think what actually took me through that love relationship with myself was, as I began to experience symptoms with the MS, my parts of my body wouldn't work. Like my hands would no longer write or type. I would have to dictate, or maybe I didn't walk right. I had to use a walker, or there were times even a wheelchair. And I wanted to hate my body. I wanted to be like, why can't you just do what you did for 50 years? Why? But I really came to terms with having to sit with each of those emotions, each of the things that affected me that way. And I began meditating back about that time. And that was the way that I could deal with it. And even in meditation, you're bypassing what's happening in the physical and going into that, uh, the time where, or the place where there is no space time or physical hindrances or anything. And so as I began to meditate and I began to see my body for what it was, I don't really know what caused that shift to be in there, but there was one day that it did shift, and I started telling myself, I love you, hands. I
Yeah.
love you, legs. I love what you do for me. You worked so hard for me. Just a paradigm shift took place, to where instead of seeing from more of a victim standpoint, I saw from a standpoint of the victory that my body was still fighting and having over this disease. I started looking at what little I could do and shifting into what I was still doing, defying odds, how it would still come back and fight for me to move,
Yes.
to walk. And
Yes.
and I just started loving and accepting myself. And again, some would look at that and say that was a dark night, because when you've got up and walked for 50 years and could walk the same way, and then you can't move across the floor to get to the bathroom, someone's got to lift you up off the toilet. And I mean, I'm just being real, it,
Yeah.
it, it gets that way sometimes.
Yes.
But it teaches you really to see the good in what your body's doing, the good in who you are, because you realize in going into meditation and doing those things that you, true you, your entity, your essence, your being is untouched by that, because it's a place that I could go into that was still divine, no matter what I was seeing on the outside. And combine that meditation and that mindfulness and that appreciation for what my body was doing for me. The biggest shift happened in me accepting myself. No matter what myself looked like, I accepted and loved myself.
Mm.
Now, I didn't look at myself and say, you're crap, because I could shoot and I could run and I could do all these things that I used to do, but now you don't do them for me. And I could have, I believe at that juncture, I could have got into a place where I stayed in the dark night, and I let it overwhelm me. But there truly is that juncture when you're going through something like that, and it change the situation, and everybody's life is different. But there's almost 8 billion, or 8 billion people on the planet, and everybody's going through something different, everybody. So you can't say, well, they don't understand how I feel. Well, of course they don't, because your perception gives you the lens of what you're understanding, and theirs is giving them something else. But when you come to that juncture that everyone comes to, of siding with themselves or siding with the outside force, it will determine whether or not you get into a self-loathing or a
Mhm.
self-love.
Mhm.
Because it's very easy even to take that self-loathing turn. I did it for years,
Oh,
in different ways. I didn't accept myself because I felt like there was more in me than what was being used, or whatever. You could side with that. It would be just as easy to side with that. But
sure.
I think at
Yep.
that juncture, if you side with self, you're going to go through a transformation, and you're going to begin to do shadow work, and you're not even going to know, you don't have language for it.
No.
But you begin to dissect those shadows and that ego, the patterns, not the ego itself, because the ego's not bad,
Yes.
but the patterns that the ego created, the little fractals of you that shot off and began to grow because of what was not whole in your mindset. So I believe that my self-love, and where I've grown in that, was a result of choosing that path rather than self-loathing.
Yes. Yes. And it is a choice. It's a concrete choice. I remember when I chose Me Too, and it was unbelievable. It was almost kind of, it's like I got dizzy even when I began to make some choices for myself, because myself was like, oh, you're choosing me. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't even know what to do with it. And it is because I struggled for a long time with eating disorders. I had a lot of eating disorders, and those type of things made me look at myself in a whole, I mean, but people could look at me and say, well, you didn't have, Ellen, you look fine. But for me, what I saw, the lens I was looking through I was worthless. It was nothing. And then all the events that led up to that and all the other stuff was so ingrained. And there was such a victim consciousness, really. I was really, and I had a poverty mindset about my own self. I was impoverished by my own belief systems, all of that. And when I did make the shift and make the choice, I'm telling you, it came with a whole lot of wonderful shadow work and all of that. And then integrating the shadows as well. I mean, there's always this belief like, well, we just cut off the shadow, because that seems to be the way Christianity even taught us. You just cut off these parts of yourself. And I'm pulling all those parts back now. You're pulling all the parts back. We're all pulling these parts back and creating inside of ourselves exactly who we are and what we're meant to be and to live and to thrive and to do all of those things. But the days of cutting off, I remember I would try to cut off the shadow and it just wasn't going anywhere. So I'm like, okay, this isn't working. I mean, I tried everything. Believe me, I tried everything. And then I was like, well, maybe I'm supposed to embrace the shadow. Maybe that, because those shadow parts of me, the shadow, oh my gosh, were areas, there was life within that shadow. There was life within those areas of darkness. I mean, a baby is created in a dark space, in a womb. You know, seeds are planted in the darkness of the ground, and they create what comes up is incredible, but they're germinated, they're nurtured, they're watered, all that in that dark place. And when I began to embrace it, when I began to say, okay, we're not going to cut this off, this actually is part of me, why am I doing this again, cutting another part of me off? When I began to integrate that shadow, began to love that shadow, began to love that part of me, it was amazing. It almost kind of like morphed into light. I don't even know, some of the shadows I had became light, and I probably don't have the right language for this, or if there's not even a right language, but they became light to me, and they became my treasures, and they became the goodness, and they became the sweetness to the taste for me. Were the shadows and the integration. And I'm still integrating. I'm still, you know, doing different shadow work on myself right now. And it's interesting. It has its moments. You don't realize all that's in there, you know, until you're
But
willing to step.
do you think that, and I've thought about this recently, do you think that the shadow parts of you are parts of you that throughout these years has been pushed down and pressed down, and it is actually a part of you knocking at the door, wanting to be accepted, wanting to
Yes.
be validated, wanting to be
Yes.
loved?
Yes.
And so, you know, it is like, I like what you said, the shadow is a part of you. It's not
Yes.
something that we need to cut off. It does need
Right.
that integration or that alchemy to pull it, because there is something so pricey underneath it.
Oh my gosh.
Cut it off and throw it away, then, as Rumi says, the wound is where the light enters. The shadow is where that light enters, and that makes so much sense with what you said. The shadows seemed like some of the lightest parts,
Yes.
because that wound was where the light entered and illuminated everything about you that was actually beautiful, that you had, because of cultural dogma or whatever, you had pushed away as bad.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
integrating it and doing that work showed that shadow that you weren't against it. You did love that part of you as well. I mean, if we think about, if when the sun rose and the daytime came and then the sunset time came, would the sunrise or the sun ever say, no, I don't like the shadow time, so I'm not going down? It takes a balance, because
100%.
they both have reason, they both have purpose.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I'm looking at the time, so I'm just going to do a little bit more, but the shadow for me has become my greatest friend, my best friend, the shadows, because that's where strength came. That's where my intuition was formed. Even in those shadows, I found that just my body, like areas of my physical body, began to heal when I began to integrate the shadow. Things where my mind was kind of drifting off, and I would do this a lot, and in the wrong times for this, okay, I would just be drifting off, you know, those shadow parts of me, as I began to integrate them, there was parts of my mind that began to be put back together again. And there was a clear thinking, there was a perception shift on the inside of me that no one can take away. You know, even right down to sexuality, which was a huge fight and a huge war for me, because it was considered wrong to be gay and you couldn't be that. And that shadow, I pushed that thing as far back as we possibly could. And then it exploded. And it was like, and as I began to look and realize, no, that's actually a beautiful part of me. That's who I am. That is just me. That's that, you know, it's me, it's part of me. As I began to hug that and embrace that, it was amazing. I did like a chair exercise where I put the shadow in front in a chair, and I began to talk to my shadow and to hear what my shadow has the wisdom of the ages in it. what it said back to me, what it spoke to my heart, how it illuminated my soul, how it transformed my mind, began to heal areas of my physical body as it released the wisdom that I needed to navigate where I was going right here on my own incarnation. It had the wisdom. It had the wisdom of the ages. I'm telling you, my shadows, sorry, I'm really getting excited here. The shadow part of me was where my soul family is totally located in, like, my entire interaction with my soul family, these parts of me, this family out here and in these other spaces and places, was all encapsulated within that shadow. And had I not decided to do the shadow work, had I totally done what we were taught in Christianity, cut off this and walk away, I'm telling you, I would not be sitting here right now. I would not be sitting here in my right mind. I would not be sitting here in areas of healing that I've had in my life. And that shadow had the key and the wisdom of the ages, and to show me, even like my ancestors are in my shadow. I mean, it just goes, you know what I mean? Like, it just keeps going. It's deep, it's vast, it's wide, it's expansive. It's where the height, the depth, the length, the breadth of the
Yes.
love of the universe, the love of God is found within my shadows, because the shadows do alchemize and they do become light. And there's something, there's a beauty to it. And it's like, they don't even separate though. It's not like they suddenly go from dark to light. It's like they just do this. They cohabitate together. And it's a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And it's where my dream life is. And it's where everyone can find themselves as doing that shadow work. So I don't know, I could go on and on, but I just want to say, I'm going to ask you one last question. And where do you think we're going as a planet? I know this is a big, huge question, but where do you see us heading? Where are we going?
You know, that is a big question, but I will go back to something you said a while ago. Even if we're just sitting here, we're still making a sound. We still have a frequency in us. And although, I don't believe that and this is just me, this is just my beliefs. I don't have any kind of thing to back it up, but looking at even people that are in different levels of moving into a different frequency or vibrational match for raising their vibration. I know that the whole planet, the vibration of the whole planet is being raised and consciousness is expanding like crazy. But I can't help but believe that each group of people, if I can say group without segregating, but because the groups are segregated by belief systems and stuff, I've had to ask myself, do I think that everyone will take this expansion in consciousness and that they will do shadow work and that they will find themselves and that they will love themselves? Or do you think that these groups of people will still continue on as life as usual? And so there was a time where I thought, no, the whole planet is going to go, everyone's frequency is going to be raised. And then, there was a time too, though, that I look back at that and I know how much I did out of the passion of my heart. And I know how very much all of these groups of people are doing things from the passion of their heart. And it's kind of brought me to a place where, and this is just a word that I made up, but gatekeepers in each of these areas, in each of these subdivisions of where I used as springboards to go from one level to another. I really believe that they will stay as they are, because in finding yourself and loving yourself, it did take a certain trajectory of those things to get me to the point that I am now.
Yes.
And I have to ask myself, had I not gone through them, would I have arrived at the same place that I am now with consciousness and everything else and integrating the shadows? I don't think that I would have. Now, if we could all stay as open as we are when we're 5 years old, I may have.
Right.
But because going through the cultural thing and school and just all of it, decisions, all of it, I think that did springboard me to different levels that would even bring me to where I'm at now. And life is pretty much cyclical like that. You know, we go through cycles of our life where we can learn from anything that happens within that cycle. We can learn from the painful places and the joyful places. But I don't I don't know that I think that everyone will make that shift. I do believe that there will probably have to be gatekeepers, so to say, in these levels that will get people to know who they are.
Mm,
Um, but there's a scripture in Isaiah that says there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and the sea will pass away. And if we go back to the temple, the original temple, heaven and earth was behind the veil, and the sea was the outside or the gathering place of the temple where people who felt like they weren't worthy to go in the temple had to stay. Well, I can see in this time of consciousness and shifting that the sea has been done away with. We're all on a level playing field. Now, some people might not believe that because of their confines that have been constructed in their life, but we are on a level playing field. You know, Ecclesiastes 7:29 talks about how we came here upright, but then we got snowed into all these beliefs. And I believe that to be true. Um, I believe we did come here upright and we're going along the right way. And then we were conditioned and whatever. And that may be part of the earth. That may be part of the veil of forgetfulness when we come from the divine spirit and we incarnate into these bodies, and then we're separated by everyone being different. That may be that we've made that transformation and came into this body and forgot all that we are. But I feel like
mm,
going through these different places wake us up to the ancient truth that we are ancient within, that we are the timeless seer, that we do have a path less traveled, and that we're able to get on it at any time. But I do believe that the sea is passing away, and the young generation is showing us that, because there's not those people that feel that no longer that they are not enough. They are under the belief that they are enough. And so I do see the sea as passing away and there being a new heaven and a new earth. And that's scriptural, that is in there. And I think the new earth is going to be knowing how much of this on this physical plane is not a reality. The reality is within, and it's within our perceived uh, blinders that we have on, or our lack of. And when you boil all that down, it comes down to consciousness and vibrating at a higher level in your consciousness. I heard someone say a butterfly can't speak to a beetle, and you really can't. They coexist. They do life together. And so I know that we can do life with those that are not a part of our belief system, because nature shows us that they can all coexist and make everything work out fine.
yeah.
So, but in the end, I don't know. When you ask about the new heaven and new earth, I don't know that everyone will be at the same level consciously to understand these things, because even I wouldn't have understood these things 15 years ago. I would have said that you were crazy if I
Mhm,
heard myself
mhm.
talking like this. And so I know other people do. So that, I don't know, I'm kind of at a point where I feel like there will still be a kind of a wedge to rise in consciousness.
Thank you for saying that, because I actually feel something similar. I can't word it the way that you're saying, but it's because we're all very different too. I mean, Everybody's experience. I mean, you could have the exact same experience and perceive it totally different than me. And so therefore my raising of consciousness or wherever I'm going is going to have a whole totally different process to it. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think I can get, you can see a lot of like the unity and the oneness, and, there can be all this like, we're all going to come into this one space and place. And for me, it's my own personal opinion, and maybe I just don't know enough about it, but I feel like that takes away from some of the individuality that we really are. I remember I had and this is my last thing, I had a vision. I was in this, it was only like a month ago. I was in the sea of consciousness, and I saw the whole sea of consciousness happening. And I was in meditation, and I was kind of in this space. I was in between spaces, and all of a sudden I had this, it just like I entered into this like live vision, and we were in the sea of consciousness, and we were all in it. But everybody still looked different than the next person. Everybody still had their own unique energetic signature that no one else had. And that energetic signature, and then everybody's life, and you compound everybody's situations, I foresee a gradual process to the awakening into the consciousness that you're speaking about. I don't see it being the sweeping thing. I think we would all love to have sweeping. Sometimes it can feel like we would want sweeping, but for me, that takes away. I just feel like it takes away the joy of the journey. When everything's just all this sweeping moment, it takes away who I am personally, myself, yourself. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I agree. And if I could just say one more thing.
Sure.
What that reminded me of when you were saying that is taking away. This is the thing I see, even with art or anything, or with day and night, there has to be a darker and a lighter to give that transition and that not comparison, but I've had a loss for words too. Texture. There has to be a texture in this life to have experience. And if we are in this life to have our own experience, we're going to have it through the paradigm of the lens that we see and we feel through. So to say that everyone would come to this sweeping same experience, and there would be no place for the light to shine on the darkness, or for there would be nothing no comparison, or no comparison's not a good word, but you know what I mean. There just would not be that. And I feel like because we're all individuals and we all carry those signatures, the energy signature that is in and of me, no one else can produce that leads me to think that, will everyone dismantle who they are? I mean, I hope they do, because if we dismantle who we are in the false sense and who we've built up to over all of our lifetime, that's great, because everyone comes to that. But I just don't. I think it's a choice, and I don't see God as making everyone do the same thing. If we are all here for our individual experiences, I see people staying in areas where they are.
I agree. No, I'm totally with you. And that's their choice, and it's their free will to do that. To say, because I remember I had this out with someone recently here in England, and they said, we're all just going to rise into this, we're going to rise into the consciousness. And I just said to myself, but what if I don't want to do that? What if today, okay, let's use it as like, everybody's ascending, right? It's it's the word right now. Okay, everybody's going to ascend. What if today was the day of ascension? Let's just say this this is, like the rapture, and everybody's ascending, but I just don't want to ascend. Do I have to ascend because everybody's ascending? I know that sounds ridiculous, but it takes away again the exploration of self, and it moves you from self-love, where you are creating your own self, your own life, and pulls you back into, it's almost like a conditioning. You're back in again with the conditioning group again. We're all gonna do this together again. The group think. Well, I don't want to be part of the group think. I'm my own person. You, Tonya, are your own person. The neighbors, their own person. Yeah, I'm not. the last thing I want to do is look like you and you to look like me. That
Yeah.
is a betrayal of who you are, and it's a betrayal of me. It's insulting for me to try to be like you. It would be insulting is a strong word, but it's like,
Oh, that's a good word.
I can't even digest that. Everything in me says, no, you are you. If our fingerprints are different and there's 8 billion people, then definitely my whole body, your whole body are the lens we look through. Even the pineal gland, everything, it's unique to us. The revelation that you get can be similar to revelation I'm getting, but it's yours. It's your revelation. It's your understanding. It's who you are. And I think for me, that's where I want to see, like almost like a coexisting, like we can coexist. I feel like that's where we're going in certain ways that I would love to see happen, is more of a coexisting, not I'm trying to be like you, not I'm trying to awaken to some level. I got to be like, Paramahansa Yogananda. I mean, I love his books. Great. They're fantastic to read, but I am not Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm not, I don't want to be. So it's fascinating. I don't know. I feel like we could really discuss this for a long time, but thank you, Tonya, for just taking the time just to be here, to share your wisdom. You have incredible light. It radiates. You are alive, and what you bring through and what you carry and what you share, and just the very demeanor, you're so poised with grace. And it's just all over you. And there's a strength that oozes from you. And I know that comes from all that hard places, and it comes from the struggles current and the struggles that, you've been through, and the ones that you will, have even in the future. We all will be having our own share of struggles, but how you have alchemized it, how you have turned areas on its head so that it wouldn't dominate and crush you and rule your life and basically kill you in a lot of ways. I hate using that word, but kill you is beautiful and should be honored. And that's why I wanted you on here. That's why I wanted you to share. That's why I wanted you just to be present in this space, because your energetic signature is fire, baby. It's fire. It burns. It's passionate. It's bright. It's inviting. It's welcoming. It's warm. And I just want to say thank you for all that you've done in this life, for how you've utilized your incarnation, and how you have helped and shaped and molded and rescued and done the things that you've done. It's a beautiful, powerful testament of a life that has overcome and will continue to overcome. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That's so sweet of you. Thank you. And I know you've done the same thing, and we could talk for hours, like you said. So I have a feeling that we will do this again.
We probably will. I get that same feeling. All right, Tonya, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.